We knew that COVID as a virus particularly affected our elders. And they have, as you know, have a really critical role in our community. So we needed to make sure that we got them safe and secure, and we limited the amount of contact of people coming into their homes. And that means, in the same way that makes us strong, and when we think about COVID, that can make us vulnerable because we are so connected to everybody. We've got to make sure that we put in place those extra measures that enable us to wrap around and support us as a community, as a family, and as an individual.
And we've always been very family oriented, and I think it was hard for a lot of people not to be able to go over to so-and-so's house. And thinking back on, I think the hardest thing, besides not having the children around in school, was when we had funerals, and when you've got a loss and you can't share that time with family in the morning. That was sort of culturally, well, it was really sad for us. In the situation we've been in the last few months, I've never really experienced anything like that before within the school system, except when I was going to school myself as a young one, and polio was then the danger for people.
I remember my grandmother, who was the family enforcer of our family in Narrogin, and she was the one who gave the direction of family control and where family should live. Families should live kept apart, but we had plenty of space. There was plenty of country. She'd say, "You go and stay over there. That's where you put your camp." Now, with a camp, they can put it up and put it down, take it down so quickly and easily, or you go over there. And this was the boundaries, and the boundaries were the trees and the rocks, and you weren't allowed past there. You had to stay in that area.
There was a lot of diseases like chicken pox, measles, mumps. They were too bad. People got very sick and blotchy and everything, but they made it. They got over it. Polio was a disease that you would get polio, and you were very lucky if you got over it.
Well, I remember the pandemic because I would have been at school at the time, and one of my cousins contracted the polio, and he was crippled for the rest of his life. He swung along life on crutches.
Back in those days, if you weren't strong enough, you could die.
But, there were children that passed on, and you said, well, like, what's happened to them? Oh, they died, poor fellas. Others that were sort of being birthed with defects. There are still people now in the community that are, carrying the effects that they had before.
When I was 11, I had the diphtheria virus, which was a long time ago. I was only 11 and now I'm 93. Grandma Farmer came through and walking up to town, and she said, "You better get the doctor to Beryl because Beryl is very sick." I can remember putting her hand on my head and giving me a hug. And the next minute, I was getting put into an ambulance and taken to the Katanning Hospital. They were in white. I was in white. It was very daunting and very scary for me.
It was very like hovering over the school, and everyone was frightened. At that stage, everyone knew somebody who'd been crippled by the earlier pandemic, and naturally didn't want it happening to them or their children.
Yeah, it was an unknown. We were terrified. Didn't quite know how you got it or anything like that, you know.
And two of my friends got the disease and they got sick and died. Then the next minute I got sick and I thought, my God, I'm going to die too. But I didn't.
Yeah, when you look back on records, there were a lot of people that passed on through the different illnesses that came about that weren't natural for our own people.
If you don't reflect on the past and understand it, you're going to be in a position where you might just repeat it.
I think the whole living culture has been a pandemic, in a sense that, we never had control over whatever, anything that was brought to us. I mean, all the diseases and illnesses that came with the early settlements wiped out a lot of our people.
As an elder, it's not new. It's not anything new. We've been through many pandemics and epidemics since since colonisation, since they came to this country.
We weren't exposed to those sort of things anyway. We had a pretty much clean living in our societies, where the bush was everything. It was pretty pristine, not touched by any other cultures.
What I found during all of that process was the way they were delivering healthcare to the Aboriginal people. It was not meeting the needs of the Aboriginal people at all, because they didn't understand Aboriginal law and culture, and they didn't know how to deliver it. And it was all about interpretation, translation, and implementation. And that was very difficult for the white man to do, was because it was all about Aboriginal law and culture. And we didn't want to give them Aboriginal law and culture for them to exploit.
In the past, I'd been on curfew, and our family had been having to have permits to go from one place to another. So it seemed like it was a replay of the past, in some ways, for the wider community as to what the Aboriginal people had went through, but it wasn't through a sickness. It was social standing.
You talk about the pandemic and you can't do this and you can't do that. We grew up with that pandemic. We weren't allowed to talk to our kids, our family members and stuff like that. And if we met on the street, we had to keep our distance.
There's often said that the strong will survive. It actually isn't. It's about those who are able to adapt and understand what's happening in their environment, to be able to change those circumstances, to be able to ensure that they get along, that they're able to minimise the impact of that damage in a way that it doesn't overtake them.
I always have this feeling for Aboriginal people. We're still standing strong. despite everything that's been thrown at us. And family were really good in understanding they couldn't come near us because of us being older. And
I like it for the fact that it slowed everything down, and the world needs it in such a big way because it's just the way we've been too fast for such a long time, and we are meant to go for this. It's slowed everyone down. But it's got more family time now, more community, more unity.
The leadership from the Aboriginal community in terms of what we've done in the remote communities is exceptional. It was high standard. It was clear leadership. We acted swiftly, and it was real testimony in terms of, particularly through our Aboriginal community control health organisations, that sector nationally, particularly in the remote Australia, just was able to be marshalled and mobilised incredibly swiftly. And as a consequence, there was no COVID in our communities. We were highly vulnerable, but that leadership just highlighted our connections, our relationships, the knowledge of our country, and our ability to put that knowledge into action in a way that protected us, in a way that other parts of the Australian society, and most definitely in the world, haven't been able to.
You have to be aware of, when you're around people. Just think if you were to be a carrier, eh? And then something happens to your family, how are you going to live that down?
I look at this COVID as a blessing, to tell you the truth, and I don't mean it in a bad way. I just think we need to do this more often, slow the world down, and spend time with our family, our kids.
I'd hate anything to happen to those little children, so of course you're going to be doing the best you can to keep them safe.
closing those borders and protecting especially our communities out there. Most of us know we're all pretty safe in this state.
The state of health now and the information we've got about keeping healthy and keeping away from infection gives you a lot of confidence now that you won't fall down to this particular epidemic.
We've got a long way to go. We've got a way to go. And we're not going to lie down and we won't give up.